Subscribe, hit that bell icon, and share this clip if you enjoy it. This is TRS Clips. What is it that the average person doesn't know at all about the ocean, but you know, and you're like, your people should like know about this?
I mean, I think since we were talking about workers, who works for 4 years continuously, every single day of the week for 20 hours a week, on a fishing boat that, let's say, runs out 100 kilometers of line? And 100 kilometers is like, I've driven 100 kilometers to be on your show, right? So that's the kind of fishing gear that a fishing boat is laying out every day. There's 10 people on those boats. And it doesn't come back. So it leaves a port, let's say in Taiwan, and it's in the middle of the Pacific catching tuna. And it doesn't come back 4 years from the day it's left. And that's immensely industrial and out of people's realities, right? Like we think about people migrating from Bihar or UP and coming to work in the hospitality industry or construction industry. We think about people going to the Gulf, but they're still on land. Not to say conditions should be compared. But, just being out at sea on a boat floating in the middle of the ocean for 4 years, I think that's pretty intense. Not a lot of people know that that's the kind of work that is taken to catch fish that we find on our supermarket shelves.
Is it true that the ocean is running out of fish that you can eat?
It is. I mean, so let's say a very short history in the way the oceans exist today is the last 100 years. So Japanese American expansion after World War I, World War II was the first kind of global expansion into the oceans. Before that, most countries didn't think about the oceans beyond like 6 kilometers or 5 kilometers for sure. Technology didn't exist. Staple diets, which go back a few thousand years at least, didn't really require fish that were further apart from there. But that's where we went. And then you've had World War II, you've had Spain coming out. And since 90s at least, when India entered liberalization, it's been China which has been happening this global expansion. And what has meant in that is that the oceans have always been a space for profitability. So the further you go from land, you meet a newer species, you fish that out, you go a little bit further out, you meet a newer species. So the amount of fossil fuel and the amount of distance that fishing boats are spending has almost doubled in the last 50 years alone. So that's an indication that we are expending a lot more energy to catch the same fish. And then you have species change. So, I think urban consumers might think about pomfret, surmai as being our mainstay species. But you speak to anybody who lives on the coast and has a staple fish diet. Fish that were available 20, 30 years ago no longer exist. And that's the second indication. This is people's lived everyday experience. Those fish don't exist. So in that sense, we're landing the same amount of fish, but fish that was edible, that was healthy, that was megafauna, big fish, we're not finding those. What we find are more, what they say, trash fish. That fish that gets ground up and fed to fish that's been grown on land. So it's like fish is feeding fish to feed humans as opposed to fish feeding humans directly. So in that sense, there's a lot that has changed in the ocean composition, and it's not a rosy picture for sure.
Like when you say it's not a rosy picture, where are we heading? Like say in 2030, what are beaches? What is the ocean going to look like according to you? If we keep going this way.
So the oceans, of course, are like not just fish, right? Like the oceans have marine life. You've also now got an infiltration of plastic. So there's a friend filmmaker called Chris Jordan who's done this beautiful film called Albatross. And he just went on this atoll, which is like a coral reef in the middle of the Pacific. And he filmed albatrosses over one cycle. And there are albatrosses who are not being able to take off from the beach. When they're born, they get born on the beach. And they go over to the windward side. They spread their wings. And then they take off with the wing, and then they fly for the rest of their lives, coming back to the island that they were born on. And they're not being able to take off. They've got so much plastic in their belly because as the adults are flying over the ocean, they are picking up blue things, pink things, white things that resemble reef fish, but it's actually plastic. And this is in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the Pacific. So that's a big concern. In fact, on one of my campaigns in Antarctica, there's this world's deepest fishery. Like they catch fish at about 1 kilometer under the surface. So we did a plastic dissection on some of the fish there on one of our campaigns. And we found plastic there as well. So it's a massive concern. Pollution, of course. I mean, we're speaking from Bombay. And pretty much the 10, 12 kilometers of the coast of Bombay is just industrial and everyday waste that goes out, whether it's from the pumping stations, whether it's from, the Thane Belapur industrial belt, chemicals, etc. going out. So there's, obviously it's like a sink for dumping waste. It's like a cheap disposal site, essentially. And that's not really going well. Then you've got the fishing sector, obviously, that's got this global reach that's wiping out very important species. And then you've got the very real threat of climate change now, where there's acidification, which means coral reefs are dying. You've got ocean warming, which means ocean currents are changing. They're either weakening or strengthening depending on where they are, which means big, keystone species, as they say, like whales, for example. These migrate massive distances. They are massive regenerators of ocean health. There's a drastic impact on their lives as well. Numbers, reproductive rates are dropping, migratory patterns are changing. So the entire chemistry of what happens in the ocean is also shifting underway. And I think it's important to kind of register that for a moment rather than just it being a factual thing, because that essentially is like the largest ecosystem on this planet, right? Like we call it a blue planet for a reason.
Yeah.